Welcome to Platforming China Dialogues webinar series. I'm Haiting Yu, Professor of Media and Communication at RMIT University in Melbourne. I'm speaking from the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of the land on which RMIT stands and conducts its business. We pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. Platforming China Dialogues is a quarterly webinar series featuring informal conversations and exchanges in relation to digital China research. It is part of my project on the social implications of China's social credit system funded by the Australian Research Council Future Fellowship. Today's webinar is the fourth and the last in the webinar series for this year. It is co-organized with the academic journal, communication, and the public. From next year, we will have a bit revamp of the webinar series to make it more frequent and a more diversified researcher. Okay, there are more people coming in. I apologize for the model up of the link to the webinar today. The bit.ly somehow the link was corrupted, so I'm really appreciate that people make the effort to join today's webinar. So in the last webinar, we discussed Global China as Method with Nicolas Loubert, co-author of the book Global China as Method, published by Cambridge University in August. The book challenges some of the simplistic and stereotyping perceptions about China and the Chinese people. Following University of Chicago's Qin-Kuan Li's advice, I quote, "Studying global China means reimagining China beyond China, connecting, contextualizing, and comparing Chinese development with that in other parts of the world," end quote. Global China's method entails a reimagining of China from a more contextualized, global, historical, and relational perspective, viewing China as part of the world and global capitalist systems, focusing on the processes that underpins China's integration or reintegration into the global systems, on the parallels, linkages, continuities, and evolutions, as well as ruptures and flaws resulting from China's engagement or entanglements with the global system. Following the discussion of the Global China as Method in the previous webinar, this webinar focuses on digital China as Method, localized theories, and transcultural communication. I have invited three distinguished scholars in Chinese media and communication research, Professors Yu Hong, Jing Wu, and Yuezhi Zhao, to join us today to reflect on the field of digital China scholarship and the power knowledge paradigm in scholarly transcultural communication. Our invited speakers and myself are all media and communications scholars of Chinese background. We're trained in the West, having working experience in the Western institutions as well. We are known as China studies scholars, versed in the Western theories to apply to the Chinese experience. We engage in dialogues between the East and the West. At the same time, we pursue or try to pursue an independent path in media and communication research that is rooted in Chinese realities, in dialogues with the historical materialistic universalism, aka Lin Chun, and the sinological Orientalism. While emphasizing the agency of researchers and the research subjects in the indigenization or sinicization drive in digital China research, we cannot avoid being pulled into the broader social, technological, and the geopolitical transformations and the turmoils that we all face today. We face technological transformations in how we live our lives, conduct businesses, and interact with each other as individuals, communities, and countries. We also live through the epochal change in global politics regarding China, the Middle Kingdom that is keen to reclaim its position in the center of the world of nations. We conduct research on digital China in a very interesting time and space, where a whole range of discourses, concepts, and contradictions can be difficult to maneuver and decipher. Geopolitically, whether they are about China rising, China's threat, resisting or containing China, or sinicization or de-Westernization, resisting Western centrism or countering their information warfare on the other hand, on the other side of the fence. Technologically, whether they are about digital depression or digital technological fix, The latter, digital technological fix, seems to have grasped the imagination of the whole Chinese nation as it rolls out a range of programs like iVillage or smart cities. How to make sense of such complex and evolving field of research and knowledge production is a challenge for all of us. Professor Yuezhi Zhao, let me just get in some people first. Okay, Professor Yuezhi Zhao has proposed adopting a transcultural political economy of communication framework to engage with the question of China and the cross-cultural communication. The transcultural political economy of communication framework is rooted in the clashes of powers and discourses, I quote her. It is self-regenerative in that sub-frameworks can be produced in the global epistemologies of power knowledge. Digital China so is taking as a temporal as well as geopolitical space, a space of historicity and relative autonomy. It is a nexus for reflection on the field of research in communication technology and culture. So on this note, the spotlight is now on our panelists. Our first speaker is Professor Yu Hong. She is Professor of Communication at the College of Media and the International Center, Zhejiang University. Her brief intervention will be followed by the second speaker, Professor Jing Wu. She is Professor of Communication at the School of Journalism and Communication, Beijing University. Our third but not least speaker is Professor Yuezhi Zhao, who does not need much introduction from me. We all know her, we all come for her. Professor Zhao is probably the most well-known figure in political economy research of Chinese and global communication. She is currently Humanities Chair Professor at Tsinghua University. Professor Emeritus in School of Communication, Simon Fraser University, as well as a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. So over to you, Professor Hong.
Thank you, Haiqing. Thanks everyone for participating in this event. Like last time, I think this event will be quite conversational rather than formal. So we will just keep the talk going on. So I will keep my my sharing quite brief. I will just share some basic positions that I have recently developed. So first of all, I think we all agree that media in broad sense is political, because media as infrastructure, as a modern infrastructure, support certain kinds of expressions and distributions of resources. So therefore, it is important, for example, for political economists to study the really traditional topics like ownership issues, like the copyright issues, because the political economy of media decides what type of ideas, whose needs, and whose solutions will be more likely to be expressed and circulated. So therefore, I think media is quite political, even in today's world. And and also we also know that media is also generative because it connects people. So with the development of new technology, such as the internet, it brings different groups of people together, and therefore generating new possibilities, new historical conditions. So I think that is my basic understanding about media and why it is important to study media. And then I think for me and for many of I think at least a couple of us, political economy of media is a foundation of our scholarship. So naturally, for someone who are trained in Western critical traditions, kind of critical Marxist political economy analysis of media, it has been our starting point. So like my advisor who developed this paradigm about digital capitalism has been my starting point for studying Chinese media. But then, as my own scholarship developed, as someone who is more familiar with global diversity, or at least the Chinese situation, I becoming more independent in the sense that I distance myself deliberately and strategically from a very pure North American context-based digital capitalism framework. The reason is because I think because of the context, the historical context is different. So when, for example, Dan Schiller developed digital capitalism paradigm, most of his empirical evidence comes from the North American context, and his object is the transnational companies and the state business relations that characterize United States. So when I use his model to study China, I find that I have to kind of creatively change his model in order to make it appropriate for understanding China. So, so I think because of that shift of perspective, I realized that it is very important to further conceptualize what is median, what is median technology. So on the philosophical level, I think median ultimately is a product of social structures and social relations. Okay, so I think on that with regard to the relationship between media and the society, I'm very much on the interactive. I'm very much aligned with the interactive approach. I believe that society, the social relation, creates technology, creates media as a product. And therefore, when we criticize media, we are not actually criticizing technology per se. We are criticizing the social relations and the social practices within which technology is embedded and informed. But at the same time, technology does have agency in the sense that technology as an element embedded into the networks of relations will generate new historical conditions. And so I think it is a very much a dialectic relationship between media and the society. So therefore, after having that general understanding about how to approach media and the technology, I think I realized that when I study China, I need to, on the one hand, be mindful that a lot of new technology is indeed developed by this whole regime of digital capitalism. For example, the financial capital drive technological change. But at the same time, I do realize that the technological invention, application, and migration has to be conditioned, recontextualized by Chinese local politics. So I think when we study media and technology on the ground, on the foundation of digital capitalism, it is very important to do some boundary work. And by boundary work, I refer to at least the two levels. One is that we have to pay attention to the temporal spatial diversity. So again, it is about distinguishing different contexts. And the context could be defined by sphere and by scale. Okay, so and I have been talking about this over and over again in my own research when I study Chinese networking history. I find that Chinese communication system can be characterized as a hybrid system. So in the sense that Chinese median system, because it has followed different political economic trajectories. So as a result, this whole system contains political economies in plurals rather than as a singular. So I think it is very important to understand that there is a more capitalist version of communication in China, and there is also a more socialist, a state-directed sphere of communication system. And so how do these different spheres of power interact and compete with each other, and it's a very important open-ended question. So I think again, I want to highlight the plurality within Chinese communication system, and this plurality comes from China's interaction with globalization, and it comes from the multiple trajectories of market reforms and opening up, and also comes from the planning economies during Mao's era. So I think because of the different trajectories, so as of now, what we have inherited is really hybrid possibilities and resources. So I think that's one type of boundary work that we need to pay attention to. Without understanding the plurality, it's very likely that we will write scholarship that really pigeonhole China in a particular category. Like either you write about internet as a democratizing forces, or you write about platforms as big giant corporate like tycoon. So I think if we don't recognize the hybridity, then it is very easy to pigeonhole China's communication and its development into one stereotypical categories. So that's one type of boundary work that I think is important. And the second type of boundary work is about separating median logic from social logic. And I got this inspiration from Dalai Smythe's book, Dependency Road. I think Dalai Smythe is a critical political economist from Canada, but I think he's, even though he's a critical scholar, at the same time, he's quite optimistic because he's constantly saying that the audiences are the commodities, but at the same time, audiences have power. So when he say that, he actually is referring to the fact that audiences as consumers are autonomized kind of individuals, but when they function in social context, they take up collective identities as groups, as classes, as certain for example, gendered or racial groups. So I think it is very important to recognize that even if media technology these days are instigated by capitalist logic, it is very important to understand that beyond media, there is a much broader social dynamics, and how media. So to what extent median logic will overtake the social logic, and to what extent under the influence of digital capitalism, localized median development is still possible. I think these are two very important questions. So even though I still very much agree with the whole digital capitalism criticisms, and I appreciate the understanding that media is constructed through power. I think it is also important to distinguish the media as a smaller kind of unit of an analysis, as opposed to a society as a bigger unit of analysis. So that's so boundary work is important if we want to do China-based research. And of course, when we talk about China, it's a global China. It's China being globalized, and at the same time, China is influencing external environment in different ways. And also because today we are talking about the knowledge regime. The media and communication as a knowledge regime is very much influenced by Western theories, even up to today. And when we talk about Chinese media, Chinese information society, we oftentimes inherited certain vocabularies. So it's very natural to use such vocabularies, such as liberal democracy versus authoritarian. So I'm very tired of these type of dichotomies. So I have been thinking about how to break down these dichotomies and to have more have more respect of social reality and how to develop new categories based on my own research. So what I have noticed is that these days when new technology is emerging, right? So we are having 5G, we have all kind of how do you say that? AI algorithms, big data, all these new generations of disruptive technology. Actually, development discourse is very big in China and globally. So I think so recently I've been revisiting development for communication, communication for development scholarship. What I find interesting is that in the late 1970s, mainstream development, communication for development scholarship actually made a theoretical compromise in the face of the critique from the leftist side. So people like Eva Rogers acknowledge that the dominant model of the Cold War scholarship is problematic in the sense that the scholarship basically was developed in order to facilitate knowledge diffusion from the global north to the rest of the world. And the end result is to reinforcing the hierarchical relations, to reinforcing the empirical structure. And I noticed that in Professor Zhao's article, she quoted that Eva Rogers actually paid attention to Mao's development model. And Eva Rogers acknowledged that during Mao's era, the localized, the Chinese way of modernization is quite inspiring. And so I find that is very interesting. But then I also have another puzzle. So why to the 1980s the dominant scholarship become the instead of supporting a more broader way of rethinking development, ultimately become the pretext for neoliberal return. So I think when Eva Rogers made the compromise, he acknowledged that the Cold War scholarship is problematic, and therefore he proposed that development should be more participatory. So he proposed a participatory term, and according to Professor Zhao, it could be partly inspired by China's success during the Mao's era. Okay, so but then why his compromise, his kind of acknowledgement of failure did not bring the success of socialist development, but instead become the pretext for neoliberal kind of turn. So that is my puzzle. So I think it might have something to do with the broader context, historical context. For example, because of the global economic crisis in the 1970s, we know that the welfare states in Western countries, as well as post-colonial states, actually receded in the 1970s. And also, and later on, the whole global communist movement also receded. So therefore, when Eva Rogers turned to the participatory development model, actually he accidentally paved the way for the neoliberal reforms in the 1980s. So I don't know if it is a historical coincidence or he actually kind of anticipate the neoliberal shift. But I think this conjunction is quite interesting. So what we find out later on is that communication for development as a research tradition in general support participatory development instead of state-led development. Okay, and it seems to endorse the overall state failure theory, and therefore support neoliberal kind of ideological in general. So I think I think it is very interesting that so therefore I think when China nowadays is developing an information society, people are still using old terminologies to describing China, saying that it is a state-led information society, and therefore it is oftentimes associated with all different bad elements, such as mass surveillance, such as economic distortion, etc. So I think again, a binary has been reenacted. On the one hand, it is state-led model of development. On the other hand, it is a participatory model of development. So and the participatory model of development has been endorsed by people like Ever Rogers, who actually was a Cold War warrior. So so I just find these type of I find the theoretical development actually doesn't quite match what is going on in the real situation. So I think so what is so I think it is very important to keep asking, what does it mean to have a state-led model of developing information society? Because it's a very general term. So if China indeed is a state-led model, and the other nations, such as the United States, is not state-led, what does a state-led model means? And to what extent the North American model is not state-led? Maybe it also involves state participation, and historical research has demonstrated that there is always state participation. So I think now and today, I think it's very important to go beyond the so-called state-led model. So what exactly does it mean? What kind of state economy relationship that we are witnessing, and what type of state-society relationship are being recreated through the involvement of technology? But again, I think development is a big matter discourse. When new phenomena such as smart city, smart government, and digital society are being introduced, development has been a state position. A lot of things are encouraged because it supports development. But the point is development for what purpose and for whom. So I think it's really time to rethink development as a matter discourse. And so I think what I want to wrap up is that given my basic position, I believe in the hybridity of Chinese media and communication system, and also I believe that we should do more boundary work, paying attention to different contexts, and also we need to separate media and logic from social logic. And thirdly, I think what does development mean? And of course, in the field of development studies, people already have some consensus, right? So development definitely doesn't equal to economic growth. Development should have more dimensions. It should involve political development, such as a higher level of democracy, such as higher level of social participation. So what exactly is development on the ground? I think is very important. And so given my basic positions, I think when I study smart media, so all these media phenomena, I tend to, I chose to use the so-called assemblage thinking. So to think about the new phenomenon as an assemblage of different elements, and to understand how these constellation process redefine the spheres of power, and how the process redefine the dominant purpose. So the reason I find the assemblage thinking to be powerful is because when I study the county level, I find the county level is a very interesting context where the state-led county median is returning, because the state realized that the local median has to be kind of strengthened. Otherwise, the state will lose its basic touch with the grassroots population. And on the other hand, the corporate platforms have already had a lot of influence among agriculture populations. So what I find is that it is not either or situation, it is both. So in a county context, there are both county median operated by local government, and there are also corporations, corporate medians. So what I'm interested in is how these different possibilities of median structures are being reconnected, and how they compete with each other, and how local agents use different median opportunities to create a dominant purpose. So that's kind of my approach to so-called smart media, smart technology, and all these new phenomena. So again, the strategy is to use China as a method, rather than kind of dogmatically adopting the Cold War vocabulary. Yeah, I think we need new vocabulary in order to understand rapidly changing landscape, rather than use old language to repeat the old story. Back to you.
Wow, thank you, Professor Hong. What a great opening talk. And it has covered so many points. And I've just been taking notes. And before I take the advantage of me being the host, I think I would give the floor to Professor Wu, and then followed by Professor Zhao for their intervention. Floor to you now, Professor Wu. You are muted.
Okay, sorry. Let me share. I didn't know exactly the format. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me for this talk. And I prepared talking points, just 1-page PPT, so that I don't go loose to okay. Here's my and I think I'm very excited to hear Hongyu speak first, because I can just at the beginning, I don't know what exactly digital China as method means, and I just did my own understanding or interpretation of that. But now I can just follow Hongyu's point that China's, for students of Chinese digital culture or digital technology in the Chinese context, one important framework or one important understanding is that China's digital culture has multiple traditions. It's a hybrid situation. And so I was actually trying to talk about that in particular in my recent years studies or researches in the area of digital culture in China, both in terms of cultures online, consumer cultures on digital platforms, and as well as cultures of technology, cultures of digital technology, or cultures of engineers, or politics of digital technology in the Chinese context. So in both sense, I also find a very similar kind of conclusion, or that Chinese digital culture is actually not a diffusion of innovation of the, Western or American digital culture, nor it is a completely, independent and localized development out of Chinese situation, or exclusively Chinese situation. It is a hybrid, both historically and spatially, globally. So I will just make my own kind of a narrative. It's not a systematic narrative, but a kind of my own out of my own study in recent years of my understanding of the historical rising of information culture, or information or digital China historically, as well as globally. So I actually changed the Dallas mice question after bicycle what into after this is opinion 两弹一星 what, in trying to understand the politics or trajectory of a technological system, the ICT system in China, the digital technological system in China. Because I think the bicycle metaphor has this dichotomy that Hongyu just now tries to criticize, that when we think about bicycle for China, it's a low technology versus automobile as a high technology. And bicycle is more of a individualized, not in the, socially distributed, and more, socialist oriented technology, the very low technology, versus the automobile as high technology. And so China supposedly is at the position of receiving end of the diffusion of innovation. So China is at the position of to decide how to make use of an already given new technological system, that is the automobile, and to make an adaptation or local decision of how whether we receive that or not, or how we can change that already given technology. But when we go into the area of information technology or digital technology, we actually find that China, from the very beginning, already have a relatively independent and not very far behind system of research and development group of a parallel development of digital technology or computization technology in China, in New China, socialist China, even though that's a very small very small project compared to the West, compared to the Americans, but it's actually very very inclusive and very independent in terms of the technological combination or the trajectories of technologies or the basic inventions or the basic development of the technologies from zero. So it's not the case in the digital technology area or a computational technology. It's not it's not in our common sense, the case that China started to receive or learn from established Western technologies, Western digital technologies after the opening up. It's not the case. The case is that during the Cold War or during the Marine era, there was a very systematic independent development of computational technology and cybernetic technologies or information technologies in China. But of course, during the opening up era, there's a divergence. I think that's what I want to talk about today, how these commonalities and similarities or universalism in this technology system developed globally, and how they kind of divert or in different contexts. In the West, it's the context of neoliberalization of the economy, and in China, it's the opening up and marketization of Chinese economy from a socialist economy. So the ICT or the digital kind of technological system met with different situations and different political actors and social needs or social imaginations, and how they kind of interact or how they cooperate or fight, with each other, negotiate with each other, and create different possibilities. So that's the kind of narrative that I try to construct. These are just talking points. Of course, I don't have a very systematic narrative yet. I wrote several papers, and I'm reading these social histories of technologies in recent years, and this is the kind of very rough, crude kind of narrative that I'm building up piece by piece. So firstly, 两弹一星 is actually a very groundbreaking and it's original technology. It's parallel to, it's the Chinese counterpart to Manhattan, Apollo, and ARPANET. So Manhattan project is, I think it goes to, create an environment for the computational technology to develop vastly and greatly into today's situation. I think without Manhattan project, we won't be able to see today's level of computational technology. At the originally IBM or the computational technologies were developed to have social control, to calculate people's movement rather than calculate the movement of atoms and the bombs. So that's a huge different scale. And in order to have a self-defense after the liberation or the new China, in order to have self-defense, and China is facing, unlike the Soviet Union when it first was founded, it was also facing the imperialist invasion, but at that time it was facing very low technology warfare weapons. But when after 1949, China, the new China was facing hugely different war levels from the imperialist countries. So China decided to have its own kind of 两弹 is nuclear weapons and missiles 导弹 and 一星 is the satellite, today's 航天 project. And we all know that in recent months, China is almost every month or every half a month, China is launching the rockets very frequently. And yesterday, and America is also following up. And yesterday, I think, America just shot its moon project. It's newly regenerated the moon project, a rocket to the moon successfully. So that's what I wanted to say. That's the from the very beginning, China actually has a very independent and China has its own IP and basic technology. It doesn't have to buy or borrow or steal from American technology to have its own 两弹一星 technologies. But the politics behind these two, of course, I think the similarities are also very much stronger than the differences, actually. The Manhattan Project and Apollo and ARPANET in America were also kind of defensive at the beginning, at the original time, because there was a concern that the Nazi Germany will develop these technologies first. But when human society, went into this direction, and there's no way to turn back, so China decided to develop these very dangerous technologies to be defensive, to be self-independent. So there's parallel systems of state-supported high technology and defense development through and the technological logic and maybe the technological trajectories and politics are very similar to each other, because through intelligence, through interactions, I think these two camps are not developing completely two different technological systems. The systems logic are similar to each other, to have very efficient, immediate information exchange, and to have very sufficient control over randomly moving items, and to have, a cybernetic control of, very complex systems. And also during this Cold War competition, ironically, we can call it peaceful competition because of the nuclear weapons. The two blocs could not have a real war, hot war against each other. And so they must have a peaceful competition, that is a competition in the area of technological development and societal ideology and political institutions, and to compete with each other and to see which political institution or which technology or ideology are more attractive to developing countries or developing peoples in the world. And so we can see during the 60s and 70s, just now Hongyu also mentioned this development communication framework, diffusion of innovation. And in the socialist world, there's also a parallel development of technology or industrialization for raising the welfare of the people, right? To enhance, like the Green Revolution, enhance agricultural production and developing technologies for humanity. And during the late 70s, there's a rising concern of for the environment for population control, and also developments in biology and medical science to raise people's health, the condition of people's health, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think in these areas, there are also more commonalities than differences, right? Convergence. And the two blocs indeed had interactions in the platform, on the platform of mostly maybe the World United Nations platforms. But the divergence came actually during the late 70s and early 80s for both blocs. For the Western bloc, it's the transformation of the technology in military industrial complex into civic area, into civic wealth. So the expenditures in military experiment or military development, they cannot generate wealth. They can only generate political maybe advantages over the Soviet Union, but they cannot really generate development in improvement in everyday life of the people. So there's kind of transforming these technologies into the civic area, into academics first, and then to everyday, the middle class everyday life. So in the West, it comes the new investment, financialization of the information technology, and we have the Silicon Valley, right, model. We have the California ideology, information capitalism, and all that models. And at the same time, China is also seeking new ways to generate wealth in China's toward the end of the political turmoil. But before that, China mostly sees the information and communication technology first and foremost as industrial and military products. And so therefore, it's more of a necessity in modernization, and China sees it as a pride in, as a form of technological nationalism. But the infrastructure, behind all these ideas and the drives, there's a very devoted, continuous and persistent building of infrastructure in China, information and transportation infrastructure, without knowing what it might be later, how it could generate wealth, but the building is going on, and so. But on the other hand, at the early years of China's economic opening up, China was seen to have a low-end manufacturing industry, mostly along the coastal areas of the nation, and for exports to the consumption of the Western world. So that's the basic kind of dichotomy, or the two layers system at the first 10 years of the opening up and the reform. But the 90s see a huge and fast change and development of China's software, the information platform, or software side of the information economy. There's an explosion.
Professor Wu, sorry to interrupt you. Could you just
wrap up?
Be brave. No, you can continue. Just be brave. So because I'm worrying about the time. Thanks.
Yes. Sorry. So that's so in the terms of the information, new information economy, China does not have any, not much kind of tradition or experience in that. So it's more of a copycat and Shanghai style ICT development in the area of consumer industry of the China's kind of internet economy or internet culture. But in the recent, I think only in the recent 4 to 5 years, there's increasing kind of a development inside China, the independent development of APPs or consumer, like electric kind of commerce and in kind of inventions of different types of APPs in China are aiming at Chinese, the usage or the needs of Chinese society and catering to Chinese culture rather than, looking at the Silicon Valley models or Silicon Valley innovations to, adapt in Chinese situation. So we are now seeing, right now developing, is a more diverging kind of situation, a diverging development of two different types of internet culture or information capitalism, if for lack of a better words. I think it's still a capitalism. Two types of information capitalism maybe, but in one is led by American, by Silicon Valley, the other is led by maybe Chinese practices and experiments. So I'll end here. That's yeah, my brief.
Thank you. You just stop sharing.
Yeah. Okay, right.
And then we'll
How do I
just end.
quite? Yes.
Found it? Great. Well, I like the title of your talk. Following after bicycle, what? What a good way to introduce Professor Zhao, because she has written and mentioned the title after bicycle what a number of times. So let's see, how would she interpret that? Thank you. Now, Professor Zhao.
Well, I can claim the lineage that it was Dallas Smith when he was still alive, single-handedly and using his hand me the manuscript of the bicycle SWOT. Then myself wrote a piece that called Of the Mobile Phone SWOT. So I think we can go on and on this existential fundamental question, and I call it, a centennial question about where China goes. So that's one coming out of this talk. I'm glad to hear Wu Jing using the 两代一心 of the 两代一心 what. And then another thing that organized all this methodologically. So if of the bicycles what, mobile phones what, 两代一心 what, is the fundamental developmental question, then the other catchword is so and so as method. Because I'm among some of those people who wrote about, of course, secondhand, because this phrase came from Japanese scholars in the second half of the 20th century, starting from the 60s. First, East Asia as method, then China as method, and then I myself began to use China as method, and then the countryside as method, and then Professor Xiang Biao, then county as method. Check. There's such an article called county as method. Like Yu Hong was talking about using the county as a unit. And then I myself was once talking about village as a method. And of course, all the way down to the last turtle, self as a method, right? Professor Xiang Biao has a book entitled Self as a Method. And you can hear self as a method in Yu Hong's talk about how herself tried to develop independent thinking from, the Western or North American political economy mentors who have nurtured us, supported us, but sometimes also has their own way of thinking. So I think this is really exciting. And I know if you list 1 hour, I've already used up my time. So, and also if Yu Hong came with a prepared talk, Wu Jing came with one slide, I came on the condition that I come to listen to Yu Hong to talk as the primary speaker and Wu Jing as the second. And so although I'm already a retired old lady, Professor Emeritus from the School of Communication, and I've basically focused on my effort on teaching at Tsinghua University. So I haven't been writing much in English in the past few years, but all the talks, the two of them, the Greek talks, really resonate with so much of what I've been thinking. And the two talks are really complementary to each other. You won't have a broad theoretical breadth, methodological, all the way to epistemological level. Wu Jing add to that historical dimension, especially a more detailed, or of course, it can't be too detailed. You can talk for 3 hours. If you talk about China's history with regard to information technology development, has a more historical dimension that really enriches and informs or mutually reinforce Yu Hong's point. So I think this is really exciting. And indeed, the talks brought me back about my own struggles and efforts to move beyond West-centric models, even though, yes, Western political economy communication have educated us, enriched us, but it is also important for us to, when we think about China, not to make Chinese exceptionalism, but to, yes, honor the idea of China as a method, or digital China as a method, East Asia as a method. And this itself is about an intellectual approach, epistemological approach, or about intellectual subjectivity that is not making China exceptionalism, but as the original, or one of the original scholars who discuss China as a method, saying that using China as a method, but the world as the purpose, because the purpose is to going beyond particulars and to think about differences. So what I would like to do, I know the purpose is for really a dialogue. So I don't have any prepared talk, but I want to bring together a few points. The first, when you think about digital China, it is important to think about the zigzag nature of China's development path. The second is the open-ended nature of China's development path. And by the way, maybe it's coincidental and maybe it's not. These are the 2 points I made by basically 2 quotations I put in my Challenge of China article at as the very last piece of the Handbook of Political Economy Communication, which was published more than 10 years ago as the Western intellectual political economy, or English-speaking political economists communities overview of the field, and thinking in terms of where it goes. The title of my piece was Challenge of China, the larger piece, first title, but the subtitle is what I called Toward a Transcultural Political Economy for the 21st Century. And that has been my own effort. The 2 quotes, one come from Dallas Smith. He said, Mao predicted China's developmental path will be zigzag. And what Wu Jing described was exactly that. Before the reform and open up, there was already a highly developed China's computer or other related information technology economy in conjunction with the development of the 两代一星. But with the beginning of the neoliberal reform, much of those were relinquished. And then only by the new century or late 90s, China began to realize the importance of more autonomous indigenous innovation. And that came from not from some voluntary thinking or wishful thinking, but it was the fact of US continued boycott and also humiliation. For example, in terms of Beidou system, you know, the Chinese government just not long ago, earlier this year, issued a white paper about development of China's GPS or equivalent of China's GPS system. It was a real incident, you know, the Yinghe incident, you know, when a Chinese cargo ship was being stopped by US and on accusation of carrying, you know, illegal goods to Iran. And the US really cut off the GPS system for that ship. So the ship couldn't get support from the mother country. And so it was total humiliation that led China to realize you have to develop your own Beidou GPS system. So in that sense, this really phenomena fits in what me and Paula talk about when we try to propose the Chinese cultural political economy approach as approach in which uneven encounters between different systems leading to possibilities for new social forms, new possibilities. And that is the second point, which I cite Giovanni Arrighi. He said, you know, we want to keep our thinking about where China goes as an open-ended process. And that, of course, is a challenge against the Western dichotomy or the Cold War sinological Orientalist dichotomy about, you know, some kind of end of history perspective. And I think China's unfolding process truly, I won't say proves, but truly open the way for us to think that way. And our third point, of course, is what you won't talk about assemblage, about hybridity, about mixed system. In myself, even from my dissertation days, I call this process as in between, right? Always in transformation between the parting line and the bottom line. And I think that framework continues to inform us. Also, another thing I really appreciate what Yuhong was talking, and I think Wu Jing also talked about that as well, because she put China's development of the 两代一星 system within the context of the Cold War. That is social struggles. And this struggle involves not only domestic social struggles, but global struggles, international, uneven encounters, confrontations. And as we are speaking, this kind of encounter, confrontation is still ongoing at the international high diplomacy stage, right, in Indonesia, which remind us, you know, Bandung conference, all that kind of thing. So I think it's very important for us to not to be afraid of talking about struggles. I'm for one, have not been afraid of. And I think this kind of struggle involves not only domestic social struggles, again, but global struggles. And the results will be dependent on that struggle. And of course, that involves the struggle of our own intellectual subjectivities. As I said earlier, Yuhong's talk about, you know, his relationship with his supervisor, Dan Schiller, reminds me when in 2001, when he and I were developing that paper that later was published as Dance with Wolves. The subtitle is Integrating China into Digital Capitalism. I said, look, listen, I said then, yes, that's the digital capitalist logic. China's engagement is indisputable, but there is the socialist legacy. There is the Chinese workers, farmers, or other social groups, intellectuals struggle. And you can't just talk about media and information technologies without that struggle, right? Of course, Dan is somebody who also in his own political economy, very, very well informed in that kind of framework. So, again, I think today, this struggle is taking new heights at the international stage. Think about in the past year, talk about the hot wars and also the undeclared. Some people call it Third World War, right? So, intellectual struggles are very important, and it's in that context I want to bring us back to what Yu-Hong mentioned. About Everett Rogers, all that, all the ghosts of international communication study. Because for myself, yes, I have been trying to invoke the ghost of Dallas Smith to crack down or to compel people to put a proper funeral for Weber Schramm, who visited China this year, 40 years ago. Whereas Dallas Smith completed his visit 50 years ago. And in between, of course, there was Rogers, Everett Rogers, right? And Yu-Hong was saying that earlier on. Even Everett Rogers, by the end of his writing career, in the 70s, already acknowledged the failure of the Western model. But Yu-Hong was asking, why not? His proposal was not accepted, or his idea didn't get accepted. And that again speak about the uneven nature of global development, right? At the time, even Everett Rogers had already accepted the death of the dominant paradigm. Here you are in China, a whole group of intellectuals embrace Weber Schramm. Even today, just last weekend, I think the weekend before, hundreds of Chinese scholars gathered in Guangzhou, celebrate Weber Schramm's visit to China. I look at the titles of the conference. I see mostly celebration. I don't see critical scholars like, yes, bunch of women here got to speak there, right? So I think there's still a long way to go to develop a critical intellectual capacity, to move beyond old new Cold War, to move beyond rat baiting, racism, not only among Western intellectual circles, yes, even critical intellectual circles, even the hands that feed us, they can turn back, backstab us. And I myself have painful experiences. And I think it's at this moment for us to overcome all kinds of fear and all kinds of intellectual, I will say, cowardness, and to be aware of all kinds of intellectual manipulation, all that kind of thing, to embrace truly what I call transcultural political economy perspective, if you will, or something else. That is a perspective that, yes, use China as method, but the world as purpose, and for a world of if you will, coexistence, because after the bombs, I think it's too expensive for any party to use it. So in that sense, let's take McLuhan's idea, the medium as message, the nuclear bomb as the ultimate message, so that we nobody will use it, and we can try to move on. Also, I was touched, although I want to challenge Wu Jing a bit, because you are the one who once wrote the possibility of digital socialism. Why you at the end seeing that maybe this is two model of capitalism, a Silicon Valley based and maybe a Haidie, whatever Valley Chinese Haidie Alley based capitalism. So I'm a bit surprised, because I was expecting you to talk about digital socialism. Of course, again, we need to move beyond dichotomies, because it's how you define socialism that matters. And for myself, even in my 2008 book, I said socialism is not what the party state was saying, but how the people take that concept to their own hands and struggle for what they think what socialism is about. So that there is that, if you talk about the great struggle, there's the great struggle over what is socialism, okay? And I think with that and with all the information technology that was made available, we can perhaps move beyond any dichotomy and move beyond you know, what kind of all kind of repressive discourses, and think beyond capitalism, and think about the possibility of socialism with different characteristics across the world. Okay, I'm going to stop there.
Wow, Professor Zhao, you do not need any preparation, right? We all know by putting you in the last. You will not just give a wonderful intervention into the first two speakers, but also bring the highlights of this talk. So Professor Wu, would you like to respond first before we continue the discussion? I only have about 10 minutes.
I'll just have one sentence. Just for a lack of better terms I mentioned. So I, in the end, used the term capitalism. Because I think at least the hegemonic model, in the end, I said there are two parallel systems at present going on. I think the Chinese system is, it starts to have its own kind of independence and thinking and self kind of assurance a little bit, but I don't think it has a very systematic narrative yet. And it doesn't have this kind of, I don't know, this assurance of itself, confidence to, you know, transport this model or to the other parts of the world. So it's more of a defensive situation. That's controversial. That's the only, that's the only reason why in the end I end with the, that term.
Okay, well, I came back to China to struggle for Chinese socialism, so I have to speak about Chinese socialism. And also another thing, I cut you.
Optimism of the will and pessimism of the intellect.
Yes, yeah. Otherwise, I won't self-justify myself why I gave up my research, my fancy research job in Canada and come back to Tsinghua to teach. Just one more point I forgot to mention, because also was inspired by Yuhong. The point about dare to struggle, but dare to, or imperative to ground your own research. At the county level, at the village level. That's why I noticed some of my students are here, Baron Hogg, Joseph Nikolai from SFU. Why I decided that I must lead a group of students back to the village, so that your perspective is in a way 顶天立地. You have bird's eye view, but at the same time from the very ground. So if you want to study digital China, you have to study top down, but also bottom up, including at the village level. And of course, county level is essential because Chinese society historically has always been defined by county as a unit of analysis. Okay, sorry, just to add.
That's great, because as you said, Professor Zhao, you know, you pointed two issues in the beginning: the zigzag of China's past and the open-ended nature of the China's past. So the question about digital China as method is also an open-ended question. As you said, and all of you have mentioned that, whether, I know it's a cliche now to say something as a method. However, I'm still drawing on Hongyu's article, which is wonderfully written, entitled Digital China as Method. It's as an approach, as a subjectivity, as a subjective positioning. So that's the beginning of us taking an alternative approach or a hybrid way of thinking, assemblage thinking, to use Hongyu's term, to approach the field of digital media and communication technology and the culture as a unit, not a totality of its own. But I do have one question that has puzzled me. And this also draws from a comment somebody has written in the chat. The person laments on the superiority of English language. We're all Chinese, born in China, grew up in China. We all speak Chinese, but we are here talking in English. And now it reminds me of the knowledge production about China globally. So we still see the West dominance of knowledge production about China, even though we critique such knowledge production. We critique its racism, its Orientalism, we critique its dichotomy. We, as a group, and many others who are here or not here, are trying our best to bring it down to the grassroots level, bring it down to the reality, the agency of the people that you study, agency of the society, agency of the researchers themselves. We still have to struggle with the dominant paradigm of the Western knowledge production. We are all called different sorts of names. We are called, China essentialism or China apologist, when you are not against China. So whatever China does, if you don't use the term censorship, authoritarianism, or surveillance, you are called China apologist. How would you suggest, and what's your approach to such a difficult situation when we look at completely different social political entity, social political and technological entity? However, we still have to draw on some of the Western people, Western theories, in order to make a dialogue with them. At the same time, we need to defend our position, our own subjectivity, and in order to make original contribution to scholarship. It is a hard job. It's not easy. It takes years for us to come this way. And what advice would you give to young scholars, to PhD students, to undergraduate students who are still trying to find out their way in the field?
Do you direct the question to all of us?
Yes, but particularly, I think, to Hongyu and you as well, Professor Zhao. And Wu Jing, please intervene if you feel necessary.
Well, maybe Wu Jing first. Wu Jing came back from the West first.
Oh, yes. She's the first one to come back to China, right?
And Yu Hong second. I'm third, okay?
Okay, sure. That sounds good.
Anyway, sorry, I'm joking. I'm just trying to make fun of this process.
No, I think my strategy is just to ignore that. I don't use these terms and I don't respond to those terms. When I write papers, English papers, I just try to write in words that I'm comfortable with. So, of course, there are still words that are not enough. English words are not enough to describe Chinese situation, but I try to avoid more of those Orientalist words to say things. Maybe one strategy for me is to use more sociological terms to describe these kind of more ideologically charged situation, like censorship. It's more of a governance issue for me. I write it if I encounter things like censorship or kind of elitism, or I use elitism or governments or the governance rather than authoritarianism or that kind of And when I use nationalism, when I talk about patriotism, I probably use patriotism instead of nationalism. That kind of maneuver that might be.
But would
Yeah.
somebody be accusing you of exercising self-censorship?
What?
I think my situation probably is, I don't care. I mean, I'm teaching in China, so I just don't think too much about that. That's my kind of, I know probably there will be, but if
Thank
I
you.
don't know.
Okay, now Hongyu.
Okay, that's a really interesting question. For me, my strategy, I think, is to really look at certain vocabularies very carefully. So I study them, I think, in rather than invade them. So for example, cyber sovereignty has been an important vocabulary in the area of internet governance. And for some time, I think cyber sovereignty is such a taboo topic because it challenges the whole borderless internet imagination. So I was wondering, how come the Chinese government is so stupid to keep saying an idea that the world doesn't accept? So I looked closely how this terminology is developed in the Chinese context, and what are the rationales, and what kind of intervention the Chinese state wants to make, and what kind of ruptures that are already existing in the global internet governance field. So then I find out that there are a variety of sovereignty. I mean, sovereignty has many versions. And if we look beyond the communication discipline, we find that in political science discipline, people have much sophisticated understanding about what sovereignty is. So nowadays, Donald Trump is talking about sovereignty for the so-called liberal nations. So I think my strategy is to look at these concepts and try to see the mismatch between the world and the reality. And if a new terminology emerge, then I will try to see why it becomes possible now and right at this moment. Okay, so and also going back to Zhao Laoshi, the one point about Ever Rogers, I think why the reason I bring up Ever Rogers is because he is self-criticizing the dominant model by citing Mao's model. But what is interesting is that later on, he kind of circumvent a real engagement with socialism. Instead, he's taking the participatory model. So what I find intriguing is that in the West, scholars might be broad-minded enough to acknowledge critical scholarship or socialist experiment, but they don't engage deep enough. So, for example, last week I'm having a class with MA students. We are reading a chapter from Li Jingquan's Internationalizing International Communication, and I find that chapter to be really well written in the sense that it revisit international communication tradition in such a comprehensive way. Like he revisited the cultural imperialism theories, and he also revisited the Cold War version of international communication developed by MIT and other universities. But what is interesting later is that he didn't, even though he acknowledged cultural imperialism, he didn't borrow anything from that. So his solution is to take a cosmopolitan approach. So I think he would acknowledge. Well, I don't think I can articulate my idea very well, but I think he acknowledged there is a pushback against the dominant Cold War model. But then he doesn't, when he think about how the field should go ahead, he stopped engaging with non-Western experiment, as well as the non-Western, the so-called Southern theories. So I think that's the problem. So I think for me, and I think Zhao Laoshi probably will agree, I think it's very important to engage with Chinese kind of party developed theories, because when we were brought up in China, we tend to see the theories developed by so-called party state or the party schools as ideologies rather than as theories. But they are theories actually developed based on practices, and also and these theories actually work as development theory. So I think so that's kind of my understanding. So we need to develop theory or challenge given theoretical assumptions based on by engaging with discourses and knowledges that has been excluded from the pre-existing knowledge regime. So I think that's the way to do it. So you deliberately engage with what has been excluded, rather than kind of picking side. I think that's my strategy, or a strategy that I want to adopt.
Well, if it's my turn, I think Yuhong, you will be so happy with what I'm teaching at Tsinghua University. You will thrilled at my course syllabus, because that's exactly what I'm doing. And even more the joke is, I feel now I have the freedom to teach Marxism in China. When last time a bunch of racists bombarded me saying, go back to China, and some Canadian, believe me, a total liberal white man said, Professor Zhao, welcome to the club. You should set up an XLU in China. So Tsinghua University is now my XLU from intellectual racism in the West. So that's how far I go as a strategy, okay? My life is limited. I owe the best of my years, the brilliance of my years. I have tried my best to explain to the English intellectual circles about how I think about China is, use my empirical research, including, if you talk about strategy, I didn't avoid terms such as censorship. I have, in my 2008 Communication in China, I have an entire chapter on censorship, but I just don't use it as it is. I politicize the discourse on censorship. If you read it, that's how I wrote about it. The discourse on censorship, politics over censorship. And I'm proud of that chapter. So that's one strategy. You confront those vocabularies, you deconstruct it, you see the politics over those vocabulary, including Cold War framework. That's all, if you look at my books on China, of course, English books, that's what I do. Like in my first book, Media Market Democracy in China, I try to challenge Western notions of democracy. Of course, even that context, I still try to redefine a different model of democracy. In my second book, Communication in China, I have, as I said, I have a whole chapter writing about the politics of censorship. Now, if I wish, if I can redo it, I will, yes, borrow from Dallas Smith. He warned Independency Road said that socialist governments will get caught by Western discourse, bourgeois discourse on political censorship, media censorship, and you will never win. And he proposed the term cultural screens. I think that's a very good term, but it didn't get used much. So that's how much. And then the more radical is when even in my best wish, use my best effort, if people don't want to understand me, or if they got, manipulated, and I think that, wow, she's from China, she must be pro-censorship. Then go back to China, then here I am. I'm back to China, my life is limited. I'm writing and using my mother tongue to write, to teach. And that's a little bit more comfortable, actually. So others can engage with the West. The younger, Haiqin, you are still there, so you can do your best, wish your best. Another point, Rogers, and like what Yu-Hong was saying, Western intellectuals, they didn't push further enough. How can you, when the racist Cold War regime had McCarthyism as a historical legacy, when people like Herbert Schiller had to write in, use pseudonyms to write about their articles, when Dallas Smith had to leave the US to return to Canada because of McCarthy, right? So to speak about socialism freely is very difficult. And I can't agree more about in China, there's already theory. Chinese Revolution was informed by Marxist theory. Actually, you will be happy I was saying my article in Chinese. I just wrote about how you need to understand China from its own or China's revolutionary theory perspective. Just 2 weeks ago, 1 week ago, I said, why don't you just can't quote Marx and Mao? For example, on censorship, Mao had a piece called On People's Democratic Dictatorship. He said, yes, we are doing censorship because we won't allow, those people who try to overthrow socialism to speak. So I think there's internal logic, but it's very difficult for people in the West under this kind of McCarthyism, Cold War and framework to speak freely. And that's the irony, right? Where, of course, China has its own censorship, but Haiqin, you were saying, well, you are afraid of self-censorship. Well, like I can't agree more with Wu Jing. I don't care who, your own subjectivity matters, right? People have to think in a way that they themselves feel comfortable. And the most important thing is you have your own freedom, find your own peace, and speak in whatever way that you feel you're honoring your own intellectual capacity, you're honoring your own moral. And for many Western scholars, actually, if you talk about Rogers, I was doing a review of scholarship, and I can notice how people like, even among Matara, basically retreat from early on. He had written about the Chinese model, write about Mao's ideas, but for example, in his handbook for political economy of communication piece, he basically dropped China. He settled for Latin American civil society as a model for challenging neoliberalism. Graham Murdoch, one of the great political economists I respected, in his 3 moral economies, he listed, the public model, welfare model, capitalist market model, and then he went to native, if we will, North American First Nation communities for a gift economy, but totally ignore whole century of socialist experiments for good or for bad, success or failure, Stalin or somebody else. And I think that's not intellectually doing justice to a whole history and millions of people's struggle. Okay, and with that, I'm finished.
Thank you very much for this passionate discussion.
Can I just one more, very briefly, that I think it is indeed very difficult to treat Chinese Marxism as theory. One important reason is that it's not, the language is not theoretically developed. So it's kind of task facing us, I think, a translational task, a task of translation, or using, I don't know, intellectual language to translate the party's language.
All right, thanks. On that note, the difficulty of intercultural communication does not just rest with the difficulty in translation. Lots of meanings, as you indicated, can be lost in translation, but also our own subjectivity, our own, epistemology can sometimes be pushed aside or even be lost in cross-cultural communication. This is a long journey, as it's open-ended, but it's a long journey, and I'm glad that we have this conversation. This is the beginning of an ongoing conversation on digital China method. Can somebody who's not talking, please mute yourself? All right, I'm going to mute all. Okay, you're all muted, so I can talk. So I'm going to wind up for today's webinar. Webinar is way past what we have planned, but I really don't want to stop it when we have such passionate discussion. I'm really grateful for our 3 distinguished scholars to share your time and your knowledge and your expertise and advice on how and what to do when it comes to digital China research, and whether it is the advice to be comfortable in your own skin, or to borrow terms from other disciplines, or study the terms, study them, to look at the politics, the mismatch, the differences between the application, the understanding, interpretation of certain terms, or try to deconstruct the vocabulary, to critique the vocabulary that the West is familiar with. In the end, it's about forging meaningful dialogues. It's not about involution. So Professor Zhou said, I'm still staying in the West. We do need people like me to stay in the West. We do need to speak in the language that the West understands, including English, to have this kind of dialogue. We can say whatever we want to say, we feel comfortable with in Chinese, but still it is involution. It's not about dialogue. We need this kind of dialogue, and therefore I would answer the question that the student asked, why we have this webinar in English. And I hope you are giving you the answer. So we acknowledge the field of the research, the contribution of Western scholars has made in critical media research. We engage with the ones that we feel worthy engaging with, but we also, at the same time, need to develop our own indigenous theory. It's not just something that we can just do in one generation. And I hope the next generation, the generation after next, will pick up the baton and continue this journey. And we will have a meaningful dialogues and conversation in the global knowledge production about China. Thank you all for coming to today's webinar. And Hongyu and I have discussed about putting out dialogue or some kind of special issue together in the journal Communication and the Public. So keep tuned. We will put out more information soon. The recording of this webinar will be put online, and I'll put the link there again for people who would like to check out in about a week's time. Thank you all, and good afternoon and good night.